Hi, everyone. Happy New Year to you all. Happy 2022. We hope this year brings much better than 2021 had brought us. Hope everyone enjoyed their holiday season and got some time to take off and spend with your family and friends and whoever else may be important in your life. My name is Jim Bennett, and I am a regional support facilitator with the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. Here with me today is my colleague, Leslie Powell. Hi, Leslie.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be on here, Jim, and talk about the OhioISP and just kind of moving forward and looking forward to this coming year for 2022.
Absolutely. And so this is our January gathering, and it's taking a little bit of a different format for this month. Obviously, as you are all seeing this is a recorded session. We also will have some virtual office hours, which we will talk a little bit more in detail later, going through when those will occur and sort of what the expectations will be for them.
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt. That's something new, isn't it? The office hours?
That is something new. Yeah, we are, we're because we are doing this as a recorded session, we still wanted to give people the opportunity to ask questions and be heard and to interact with us. So we're going to be doing those regionally, and we will have some times and dates for you to share that.
Nice.
Yeah. So this session, again, we're recording it and not doing in person because of several different factors. We obviously in these wintry months, especially up here in Northeast Ohio where I'm located, we tend to get some weather, and we sort of wanted to be a little proactive and accommodate for any travel difficulty that people may expect. I know even there in the tropics of Southern Ohio, you guys get hit a little bit with some snow and all of that stuff. We also know that we're in the midst of a pandemic, and it has surged recently, and so we want to be cognizant of that. And we also are kind of continuing to listen to your demands as a field, you know, whether we do these in person, virtually, some combination. We want to make sure that it's convenient for you all because, again, I mentioned the pandemic, and beyond that, we're in the midst of a workforce crisis, which is ongoing and continues to put a strain on all parts of the field. So we want to be, we are aware of that, and we want to be as proactive as possible as we work through this. Just want to remind people again, and we've mentioned this before, but I think it bears being called out again, that we began this work on the OhioISP back in 2019, prior to any of the craziness of the past, coming up on 2 years now. And, you know, even though we know we're sort of in the midst of other things that are much more pressing at this time, we really want to make sure that we're continuing to provide you all with the information that you need, the guidance related to the OhioISP as we progress toward onboarding and implementation of this great system. Real quickly, just kind of an update on our UAT, our user acceptance testing. We continue to do internal testing at this time. We are going to be jumping into some external testing soon, and that's as of today's date. So we are moving forward with that, and hopefully we'll have some updates for you all on that shortly. So moving on to our next slide here, you can see we have a summary of our November gatherings, and you know, the way we do these gatherings, we like to look back and kind of update everyone a little bit on what we did the last time before we start moving forward. And so back in November was our last time doing the gatherings. We did meet in person and virtually within each region. And just to recap some of our objectives, to increase familiarity and comfort with the Ohio ISP assessment questions. That's sort of an ongoing effort that we've had throughout. And for November, it was particularly focused on safety and security and social and spirituality. So we kind of dove deeper into those sections. We're always kind of talking about challenges related to some of those specific questions or lines of questioning in the Ohio ISP, and we'll continue to do so with this gathering as well. One of the other focuses that we have is to address some what we call trending topics. And back in November, we talked a lot about supervision and behavior supports and restrictive measures, and really just kind of interweaving and avoiding repetition in the assessment and planning sections. And then our general focus throughout has really just been to build confidence, competence, and connections. And that's kind of the phrase we've been using throughout, because as SSAs and QIDPs, we want to make sure that you go into your job duties as as someone who's writing these plans with that confidence and feeling like you know exactly what you need to do.
Jim, if somebody wanted to get information on some of the past gatherings, where can we locate that information on, and have they been posted?
Yeah, that's a great question, Les. So we do have some of our past gatherings recorded and on our Ohio ISP website. Did you want to give folks the website on that?
Sure. So if you are looking to, I believe we started in September, every session has been posted, and you would go to dodd.ohio.gov/OhioISP. And with that, you're going to see the sessions, and I'm sure that Jim's going to talk to you about, we're very excited for December about the Ohio ISP demo.
Yeah, and so the gatherings that Les mentioned are those are under the resources and documents section of the Ohio ISP website that she mentioned. And then she did talk about the Ohio ISP IT demo, which was a recorded presentation as well. That is up there along with a welcome from former Director Davis. So all of that is posted on the welcome page of the Ohio ISP website that Leslie provided.
I just wanted to tell everybody, you know, if you didn't get a chance to look at the Ohio ISP demo, I know that we've been doing these gatherings and it's kind of hard to conceptualize exactly what we're talking about. So if you have some free time, I would recommend to really go on there and take a look at how it is, you know, on the platform instead of the paper version.
Yeah, that's a great point, Les. I think you know, we've talked a lot about getting familiar with the paper version and how important that is, and really it is. But the IT system is going to provide a lot of benefits, and you can see a lot of those benefits as you're going through that demo that was provided by our great training staff. So so please be sure to check that out. As we move forward to January here, just looking at some of the objectives for January, again, you'll see some consistent themes. We want to continue to go through the assessment here as we're working forward. For this particular month, we're looking at the assessment sections of daily life and employment and community living. So those are the sections that Les and I will get into here as we talk today. again, problem solving any challenges and answering questions that you may have. That's probably going to be more of a focus of the office hours. So as you're listening today, kind of jot down your questions and make sure that you're making note of those so that we can assist you during the live office hours that we'll host. Again, we want to make sure that we are looking at some of the trending topics that really relate to the sections that we're covering. So today we mentioned daily life and employment, community living sections. Within those sections, we're going to look at some of the trending topics of personal funds, and then daily life and employment's a section, but it's really also a topic as well. And we know there's some questions related to that, so we'll kind of discuss that throughout this recording here. And then again, continue to build competence, connections. I know connections is a little harder as we're doing this virtually, but hopefully soon we can get back to some in-person work and continue to build off of some of those connections that we made, especially in those in-person sessions back in the fall. All right, so with that being said, we're going to take a deep dive into the assessment, and we're going to start off, well, we're going to cover both daily life and employment and community living, and I know Les is going to start us off with the daily life and employment section here.
Thanks, Joe. So when we take a look at this, everybody is familiar with Rose Crawfish. That's the plan that we have been looking at since the beginning of our sessions. And you will notice, I just want to kind of point out and for you to remember, because it's been a while since we've met, the questions that are bold are the primary questions. The questions that you need to answer if it applies. And then you have the italicized words that basically are just conversation prompts. Sometimes, when we sit down at the table or we sit down with the individual or the team, we struggle for that communication. And this is just to assist you with the communication, to be able to kind of maybe sometimes ask the questions that nobody's asked before. So again, it's just conversation prompts. You don't have to feel that you need to answer every single question, but I do want to take note, as you can see on the screen, you will see some highlighted areas. And although we have talked about in the past that the OhioISP has been finalized, we've heard from the field very clearly that there are some changes that need to be made in a few areas. And with that in mind, we're looking at, with Rose, under the daily life and employment, you're going to see what was added, which was ongoing learning. And it just doesn't involve with the person's school. I know that we have talked in the past about, if the person is not in school, you just skip over that. But that is not the case. We want to make sure that we're talking about ongoing learning. We want to talk about what they, want to explore. Maybe they want to take courses for a GED. Maybe they want to go to a trade school. Maybe they would like to explore any type of learning, even at a local library, a certain class. So that's where we're going to put that information. And regardless of their age, we want to make sure that they're, continuing to educate themselves. And if that's what they want. And then we're looking at, if, again, I guess we've said this before, Jim, if something doesn't apply, it's okay, just to say it's not applicable, and you can still have that response.
Right.
But we want to remember that we're still in the assessment section and we're not in planning, and there's no determination that needs to be made about what services should be authorized at this point. They just need, we need to find what their needs are, what their wants are, and then identify those in the assessment. And then that will drive the service and the planning.
Yeah, Les, and you mentioned some of those changes that are highlighted in blue here, and you talked a little bit about the ongoing learning. I know there were some questions from the field too about like what people want to do during the day if they're not in school or they're not employed. And I know we've kind of said in some of those discussions that, well, that's more, you know, related to services, that's, you know, we talked about including that as a service in the ISP, like when we get to the planning portion. But, you know, we can talk here about what people want to do during the day if they're not in school, if they're not employed, because it does relate to their wants and their needs. And then that in turn sort of drives where we get with planning and authorizing services, right?
Right, and that's a good point, and that is, you know, in italics, you know, to think about day programming and what or how they want to spend their day. And in Rose's case, we know that she volunteers at the local food pantry. She also volunteers on her days that she doesn't go to the food pantry. She goes to the nursing homes and helps with sitting with the elderly. So those are things that she chooses to spend her day with. She doesn't really like to stay at home too often, so she's pretty busy.
I know we've talked about this in past gatherings, but just as kind of a refresher, if someone has like limited expressive communication skills, so they're not able to really kind of tell you what they want, do you have any thoughts as far as like what people, you know, what the SSAs or Qs can do in those instances?
So when we take a look at that, we really want to look at who's part of the team and who supports that person, who's important to that person, and they're really going to be able to give us that rich information. And you know, if the person has a close DSP, you know, make sure you're reaching out to that person and say, hey, how can you help me? You know, how can we take a look at this? And, you know, do we know any of this information? So it's just really important to take a look at, you know, who's on the team, important people, and, you know, ask those questions and they'll be able to help you.
And I guess I should mention that doesn't just apply to people who have those limited communication skills. You do want to rely on team members for everyone whose plan you're writing. So yeah, that's a really important part of the process. And you know, I think too, for those folks with limited expressive skills, even like observation, like, I mean, you could kind of gather a lot through people's nonverbals and watching them and knowing sort of the you know, what they do and how they respond. So some really good and important information there.
Absolutely. So then we go into, or we turn to the next slide, which is, you know, consider employment. And you look at the first question, and does the person have a job? If yes, is the person working in this job without any paid supports? And we're really talking about, you know, community employment and what kind of supports that person has or needs to do individual employment. And right now, Rose, she doesn't currently have a job, but we will learn that, you know, later on that, you know, she really does want to work at the food pantry. And right now she's just volunteering. And so that's, you know, although she's not currently having a job, we're taking a look, and she has expressed that she wants to find a job, you know, maybe this coming year. So we'll be able to see that into the plan. So you look at the second question, any prior work experience supports from outside agencies or paid supports that should be noted. A person may have a job, but it may be something they did not like. Sometimes we say, hey, we looked on job sites and we found a position that's open for Walmart. Let's go take you to that interview and look at what kind of job it is. And really, we're trying to fit that person into that job, where we need to be really listening to the person and thinking about what they might be interested in. And, you think about it, how many jobs have you had? Jim, how many jobs have you had since high school?
Quite a few. And it's unfortunate because you do hear that a lot, Les. Like, someone had a job in the past, but they had the one job and then everything just kind of stops. And
right.
It's just either assumed that they don't want to work or they can't work in community employment because they weren't successful for one reason or another. But it just stops there. And it's like, yeah, we all, I'm sure we all have had quite a few jobs since we got to that point in our lives.
Right. And, we just need to, and maybe that person doesn't know. Maybe that person just doesn't have, any clue. They had one job. It might not have been as successful. And now it's left kind of a bad taste in their mouth. And they just need more experiences and guidance and training. And, they need to be able to develop some job skills. And so we just because that person had a job one time, that doesn't mean that we should just just close the door and say, okay, we tried and that's it. So when you look at the third question, there are many factors that can determine success in a particular setting. We want to look at, supervisors, teachers, staff, colleagues, peers, the environment that, that person is in, and just like so many more things. And it's important to consider these factors for a person, what their day might look like. I know when I come home, I have a certain routine. I like it to be quiet. I come home from work and, I need that 30 minutes of, just kind of like winding down.
How does that work out for you, Les?
It doesn't work out too well. But in a wonderful life, and, I would like that to happen. But, we want to make sure that we take a look at that and what supports that need to be given. And then when you look at the fourth question, or I come up with the fourth question, what barriers might that person have? And can technology or supports be utilized in a way to work through the challenges? And it's so important, we look at the last 2 years and our jobs have all changed in the way we handle business, how we, just like today, we would be doing this training in person, but we have been forced to, try different and more creative ways to kind of do trainings. And the same thing with the individual. You need to make sure that, we're looking and exploring different technologies to help that person. Yeah, there's so many challenges, and we're just moving forward, you just want to think about that. So with Rose specifically, she doesn't have a job, as I said. She wants to get a job someday. And we talked about her volunteering in the past at local food pantries, at her church, and based on her desire, she wants to get a job at someday. She wants to, be able to have a job coach. She talks about being nervous, being on her own, in other assessment parts. So this is something that we've taught, we have in our plan, her plan, and we want to make sure that we're helping support her by kind of following through with those different supports.
Yeah, that's a great point there. And she obviously has a desire to get a job, and so she has specific interests, and so there's things that we kind of could look at for her, and then I think this assessment part, just getting that information is going to help us to really look at what services we need to consider for her when we authorize those in planning.
Yeah, that's a good point. So our next slide, we're talking about finances. And the first and second question, how does that person make money? Do they want to make more money? Do they receive benefits? Do they look at, we want to make sure that we're looking at the benefits received, paid employment. We want to include that information in there. And you want to really identify, who's responsible for what, and who might be the authorized representative, the payee person, what the provider, might be responsible for, what kind of support the individual needs. And, when you take a look at Rose's, it talks about, like, she receives SSI benefits, she has a payee, she understands the concept of money, but she doesn't understand the value of it. She can safely carry up to $10. She gets her spending money from her provider on a weekly. She prefers her money in $1 bills, and that's instead of just getting a $10 bill, she wants them in ones. And that's just basically, she knows that $1 when she goes to day program, she gives that dollar to the vending machine, and she gets a cup of coffee. So she's able to.
Nothing better than vending machine coffee, right, Les?
Oh, it's my favorite, Jim.
Can't beat it.
But you really want to take the time to spell out, and in this case, in this plan, it probably could have been done a little differently, where we're spelling out more details. But again, we've keep on striving, and we keep on telling and offering support, like, you're not going to have that perfect plan. You're going to reread your plan many times, and you're going to say, hey, I'm going to add more information, or hey, I don't have enough information. And basically, you just want to take your time, so it is very spelled out on what is what. Now we're looking, we're continuing with the finance section of the assessment. And what does the individual need to support to manage their personal funds? Take a look at, payments and bills and taxes, and what other kind of supports or services do they need? Are there any plans beyond employment? One thing that we recently have been talking to, and I was in a session in November, and somebody said, well, what if the person doesn't want to, they're of retirement age and they really don't want employment? Do we still have an employment goal? And you don't want that. If they're retired, they're retired, and you want to consider finances when they retire. You want to talk about end of life and funeral plans, and how they want to spend their day with their retirement. When I retire, Jim, I want to be able to basically just be outside. I don't want to be indoors. I want to explore. I want to hike. I want to travel. And those are some important questions to ask the individuals. Everybody has a plan, so what would they like to do?
Yeah, and I think being sensitive too to the fact that, like, we talked about how we ask these questions and who we ask them of. Certainly, you may not be addressing every single one of these questions with the individual, especially like, well, what's your end of life plan? Like, do you have funeral? Like that, those kinds of things may not, the person either may not be aware of them or they may not be responsible for them. They may get super anxious when talking about, end of life kind of stuff. And so I think you want to be very cautious when you're doing that. But yeah, certainly this is all information about wants and needs that's going to drive what services we're going to include in that planning section. So, you talked about like looking at like bill payment and things like that. Like, do they need help with that? Yes. Well, if they need help with that, then we're going to look at that in the planning section. Under those services, we should see a service that gets at who is responsible to assist this person with bill payment, with budgeting, with taxes, all of that stuff.
Right.
That's really going to spell out what their services look like.
Right, absolutely. And I'm glad that you put up or you stated about being sensitive, because you're right. Not everybody wants to discuss that. That's a hard subject. Retirement is a little bit of easier subject because everybody thinks that, oh, I'm going to retire, we're going to have fun, I don't have to go to work anymore. But when it comes to, planning, funeral and all that, that is a very sensitive subject. So I'm glad that you brought that up, and that is something to take in consideration. And, looking further down with the question, does the person have the things they need? And you want to look at their personal belongings and if they need technology. Sometimes, people will say, oh, they borrowed, so somebody's iPad and they really liked it. Is that something that Rose wants? Is that something that she gets? Now, Rose already has an iPad because she uses it for FaceTime, but you really want to look at what is available and how it can, help support that individual. So just like we always do with the previous, these are the summaries. So we're talking about the daily life and employment summary, what's important to and important for. And all this information that you see right here is things that you've already gathered, and they're just being dropped into this. And when I say drop in, with the IT solution, everything that you have put in for the summaries at the end of the assessment is going to drop into this for important to and important for. And unfortunately, with the paper version, it's a little bit, manual and you have to copy and paste. But I have received a few OhioISPs done manually, and I have to say, Jim, they are pretty good. I'm taking a look at them, and everything seems to be going smoothly with that. And then we have the skills and abilities section. And again, everything is coming from what we have already talked about. But I did want to take some time to kind of talk about the path in employment and point out some things. So if we're talking about somebody getting a job, that equals community employment. Once in a while, when we go out, we'll see a plan that says the person has a job at the vocational rehabilitation center or the day program, and that doesn't consult or is considered a job. So we want to make sure that you're looking at the paths, you're able to spell out the paths, and making sure that they have the correct funding.
Unless it does get a little tricky sometimes too, right? Because when some people go to their day program, and especially those who get paid for it, for a vocab type of service, they call it a job sometimes, right?
Right.
And so I think sometimes as you know, someone who's writing a plan, we may, you know, we may hear that or know that about the person, and it does get a little tricky when you're trying to identify a path. But like you said, job is community employment, right?
Right. And, you know, I was sitting there listening to you talking, and one of the things that Rose says is that she likes to go to school. Well, it's not really school. She's been out of school for 40 years, but that's what she calls it. And so I think that is so important that you pointed that out, and, you know, thinking about it and being able to negotiate that. And that's kind of tough if you don't really know that person. And again, you're going to go to the team members and say, you know, hey, does this person have a job? Or, you know, you're looking at the plan and some things just don't be or not adding up. You're going to, you know, really kind of dig deeper into that. And as we look at, you know, Rose, she's on path 2. She wants a job, and she, you know, obviously she's telling us that she needs supports and services to assist her. And that's that. So I think with that being said, it's all you, James Bennett.
But there's just one other thing I wanted to mention here. So obviously there's a lot of really good information that got you know, put into the important 2 and the important 4 here. Like you said, this is sort of the summary of the question that have been answered thus far, and you want to take really that most important information here. And I think if we were like to do a self audit, and you know, we're kind of, you know, nitpicking ourselves a little bit at times here, because as we do these sample plans and we try to get them out to the field, like you said, there's no perfect plan.
Right.
There's times where, you know, some things might get missed, especially as we try to churn out some samples for the field. But, you know, for this one, I would say, you know, we talked a little bit about assistance with like bill payment and budgeting and taxes, and maybe some things like that Rose might need. Something like that might be good to include in important 4 as well, because, you know, then this information from the assessment is going to get carried over into the ISP, and then, you know, we sort of from there we generate some of those services and supports that are needed, and we can identify those people that are going to assist her with some of those need areas.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think, did you want to go over this part as well? Because we have
you know what, that I will. I apologize. So
No,
I'll go over on this one. So
we're all right.
We're looking at the known and likely risk, and what are the risks, if any? Some sections you're not going to have any risk. So you're really going to look at your assessment section and see, you know, go over, is there anything? And, you know, with Rose, you can see that, you know, she does have some risk. And this portion will carry over to the ISP, and it'll be where the supports and services or supports and supervision will be identified in the plan. You'll see that there's going to be 2 highlighted questions: list the technology solutions that have been explored, and also if there was a technology assessment that was completed. Connecting to some of you may have already are connected with technology vendors, and they are the experts. They are able to complete the assessment, be able to tell you by watching a daily routine or, you know, talking to the person, what that person may need. You also might want to take in consideration, you know, I talk about technology, but some people don't want technology. You know, if you talk to my husband, you know, I say, hey, I added something to your Google Calendar. It frustrates him to go in there and to be able to pull that information. And so he'll just basically say, can you just write it on the regular calendar that's hooked up to the refrigerator, or next to the refrigerator, because I don't want to deal with that. So that's also something that you need to consider. Some people just don't feel comfortable with that, and they don't want that, in their life.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that, like, as an SSA or Q, like, we don't expect you to know all of the technology that's out there. Like, there are things in place, there's resources in place for people. And I know our technology first group, they I think it's through our CLE team, our community life engagement team. There's a website, a web page that our technology first team has, dodd.ohio.gov. I'm going to do this /about-us/resources/tech-first. So hopefully you all
That
got
was a
that.
mouthful.
Yeah, or you can email them at technologyfirst@dodd.ohio.gov. There you go.
And when you're talking about that, they will be able. They are offering some trainings. There are so many things I wasn't even aware of, and never thought about using technology. So it kind of sparked some question in my mind. How can I use technology in my house? Like, some of this stuff is pretty neat.
Sure, your husband would love that.
Yeah. But I also wanted to kind of touch base that, different counties have resource rooms, and, those resource rooms are, accessible to you, and maybe you try that out. If Rose wants a Ring doorbell, maybe we try it out first to see if we're, before we spend all this money, see if that is truly what she wants. And so you just want to take that into consideration.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of visiting the CLE room in Cuyahoga or Cuyahoga County, depending on where you're from and how you want to say that. They have a real, I mean, it's fantastic how much stuff you see. I know there's a lot of different counties or providers that have different things set up. So a lot of good resources out there. And I guess just before we move forward, I wanted to call out that so these technology questions are highlighted here because they're revisions from the last iteration of the paper version that we had. These will not be highlighted in the paper version that is currently updated on the web page. So just wanted to make sure people were aware of that that's not something that's highlighted in that version, but just something we're calling out here because it's a little different, it's a little change, and we just want to make sure people were aware.
Right. Thanks, Jim.
Sure. So as we move into the community living section, the first subsection here is life at home, and so we start with life at home in this section. And as we talked about in past gatherings, I mean, discussions can kind of go elsewhere. We could start, and the first assessment section's communication, and we kind of have it there for a reason. But when we're having conversations, we've talked about how things can kind of bounce around and can kind of lead into other discussions, and you can kind of go through this assessment, and it's not necessarily linear. You can kind of have a lot of back and forth. And likewise here, some of these discussions can really go beyond what's just listed here, and that's all right. We just kind of let that conversation guide us. So we talk here in this section, just kind of in summary. We're not going to go through each and every question, but where does the person live currently? Are they living independently? Do they have friends or housemates that they live with? Do they live with family? A house, an apartment? Is it shared living, congregates? There's a lot of different types of living situations out there. So we're just kind of answering that question. The next question kind of gets into, do they want to explore other residential options? And, you know, the answer to this question could potentially lead us to an outcome. So if you look at, you know, in the case of Rose here, she does like living with her friends, but she wants to eventually live next to her Aunt Joni, and would like her own apartment or house someday. And I think when we're kind of exploring what the person wants, you know, we're certainly listing that. When we're looking at maybe as a potential outcome, before we start writing that outcome, I think we first and foremost want to talk to Aunt Joni. Is this realistic? Is this something that is possible? You know, is Aunt Joni kind of on board as the guardian and the person who would be living next to Rose? And, you know, we don't know if that's been tried in the past. So just some things to kind of consider as you're going through here. Does the person have access to all areas of their home? This, you know, may or may not be a restrictive measure when we look at, you know, possible answers to this. But, you know, just kind of looking at need areas, staff assistance, adaptive equipment, technology, which we've talked a lot about today. Home modifications, are any of those things needed to help with that access? And I know Leslie talked a little bit about the Ring doorbell. You know, you could see that listed here as as something that would be in that sort of that technology realm to assist with some things that might be needed for Rose. You know, that could be something that she wants, or maybe something that she needs as, you know, someone, if she has, especially if someone has time where they're home and they may have some issues with opening the door or being trusting of folks that allow them to see the person before they would open the door. Les, anything that you wanted to add to this area?
No, I think you did a great job trying to explain that. And yeah, I think we're ready to move forward.
And so kind of moving on in that same section, you know, I guess just in general, as we're looking through these assessment questions, we want to remember that it's part of a structured template. You know, we want one plan for the state of Ohio. Everything's standardized in a sense. But, you know, these questions are designed in a way to really promote that person-centered approach, which is why, you know, as we're going through them, you know, a lot of these responses are narrative based. You know, there's open text boxes to allow us to really clearly describe what a person wants and needs in their life, which is really what the assessment is geared toward. And as such, you know, if you look at the last question, you know, does the person need help with chores around their home? And if you look at the responses for Rose, you know, she's capable, right? But she may not want to all the time, and she only wants to maybe do certain chores and would prefer others to complete them for her, which I don't blame her. I'm with her on that one. She only likes to cook on Thursdays. That's a great thing to know if you're direct care staff. Like, you need to know that information. So some really specific preferences that kind of help guide her daily routine, and just kind of calling out what you know, because those services and support options can really be considered as far as how to help her or how to assist her in the planning phase.
Yeah.
You know, I know we talked about like people who have limited communications or expressive communication skills earlier, and you know, for someone who can't, I know, like, especially looking at this question here about consider what makes the person happy or content. Like, how do we know what makes that person happy and content? And we talked about some of those things earlier, right, Les? Like, just observation, nonverbal communication, whether it be something that you see as an SSA or Q, or if you're relying on other team members, getting that collateral information from people who know the person well, just kind of watching that person, their body language, they smile, they cry, gestures, when they have some behavioral concerns, things like that.
Right. Absolutely, Jim. And when I take a look at this, when we talk about people that are not able to express themselves in the way of verbal communication, you know, I worked for years with 3 individuals that, you know, completed sign language, and they relied on lip reading and signing. And so I think about, you know, that when we're talking about this and how I was more aware of my body language. And when I say that is, you know, I would walk in the door just like I would normally do, and my body language might have said that I was mad. But it definitely, you know, I wasn't mad, you know, but they would ask me, "Are you mad?" And I would say no. So we really want to take that into consideration and with the body language. So thanks for sharing that with.
That's a great point. I think like not just their body language, but our body language as, you know, people who are involved in their lives, you know, is really, really super important. So this next subsection kind of gets into getting around, and so talks about how a person gets around physically, and then also through like transportation. So if you look at some of these questions, we're looking at, well, does the person use a wheelchair? Do they use a walker, cane, etc.? Are there, you know, surfaces such as like curbs or carpeting or grass that might be difficult for them to navigate? And, you know, a lot of times this is where we may see like a known and likely risk. You know, Les talked about that known and likely risk section that's at the end of each assessment area as part of the summary. These are where we could see risk areas, and they're not necessarily always, they're not always restrictive measures, but they're risks because if someone has difficulty navigating, you know, carpeting or curbs or grass or something like that, certainly those areas would be would pose a risk for someone to fall, and you know, services and supports would obviously be needed to accommodate for that. We're also looking at, you know, like what type of transportation's needed and available. You know, I think when we talk about this section, we're getting into a lot of the HCBS or home and community-based services rules, and you know, the HCBS rules, you know, require that the person is provided opportunities to engage in meaningful activities and to really develop community connections and integrated settings in their community. You know, we obviously are at a point now in the midst of the pandemic where that's kind of thrown a wrench into things, and so some of those mandates aren't quite as important as some of the health and safety challenges that we're facing, because that's obviously always going to be a priority for us as a field. But you know, certainly there are some resources, and hopefully we can get back into, I know a lot of people are ready to sort of get back into some normalcy as far as getting out into the community again. You know, there's a lot of resources out there. There's, you know, we talked about technology quite a bit today already. There's apps, there's social media, television, just a lot of things that are out there so that people can kind of access their community in ways that they want to, things that are specific to their interests. And then obviously a lot of local supports out there. You know, you see flyers and ads and different connections that I know a lot of providers, Les and I, when we did compliance work, you know, a lot of providers, especially like day service providers, had established a lot of great connections with local businesses, and you know, they would be able to take people to the local community center or different places to kind of help get them out into integrated settings. There's also a lot of great work out there that's being done, community-based networks. So I know the FANS network, which is really big down in Southern Ohio, the Friends, Allies, and Neighbors network. That's been something that's been very successful for a lot of folks in sort of making those connections. And then obviously, like, anytime we can establish natural supports and decrease that reliance on paid supports is a good thing. Les, anything to add? I know you've done some stuff with technology. Are there any like specific apps? I feel like you may have talked about some apps in the past that help connect people a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I was, as you were talking about the apps, I think about, the ability to use apps. A lot of the individuals might have cell phones, they might have iPads, or somebody around them might. And there is an app called Meetup, and you can research any type of interest, and it'll tell you where, say I'm interested in hiking. I would put that in there, and different groups would come up in my area that I could go hiking with and I can join. But I also wanted to say that when I was on another social media platform, you can create groups. And one of the groups that I got invited to was a outdoor, sporting event. And that they go to, if you join, they kind of talk about where they're going to the sporting event for the next week, or how you can participate. And so the individual can actually create their own group. And with that, wouldn't that be wonderful if somebody was interested in a certain thing and be able to get a group of people together to go and share something that they enjoy and an interest?
Yeah, those are all great thoughts. And as we were kind of talking about this, it kind of took me back to when we talked a little bit about daily life and employment. I mean, how many times have you heard recently of some great things that people who receive services in the state of Ohio are doing with, like, kind of creating their own businesses almost,
Right.
there's a lot of, I know, just art in general tends to be, there's a lot of great artists out there in our field. And I've heard a lot about people who will go on eBay or have Etsy accounts now, and they're sort of running their own business by selling
Right.
some of the cool things that they are able to produce. So technology can kind of lead us into these areas where I think it's maybe been difficult to get to in the past.
All right, absolutely. Those are good points.
So as Leslie mentioned during the last assessment area, we do have a summary at the end. This is everything we learned about the person in this section and community living here. So as Leslie said, this section, important too, for skills and abilities, known and likely risks. This information is all going to populate into the ISP and the IT system. Obviously, paper version is going to be a little more tedious, just copy and paste it over. And then, as with the daily life and employment section, we want to look at ways technology can benefit a person. And so we do have these questions, again, related to technology in this section as well. So, this would be, for technology solutions that have been explored. This is where we'd want to reference that Ring doorbell for Rose, so that we can kind of show, like, these are things that we've looked at, and maybe explore any other options here. So there's a checkbox as well where we can put, we can mark off that we've got some technology that we want to consider as a possible solution. And we also have potential outcome checked because, Rose mentioned that she wanted to live next to Aunt Joni. So that's going to be something that we check as a potential outcome, and then come planning, we could maybe explore that further if we feel that there's a need. So with that being said, we're going to move into some what we call trending topics, and I'll let Leslie take it from here.
Thanks, Jim. Can you take over just for a second?
Yeah, I hear your friends in the background saying hi. So hi, friends of Leslie. Yeah, so for the trending topics here, we have a couple of different areas that we are covering. As I mentioned earlier, within these specific assessment areas, we have personal funds, which, as we went through that finance subsection, we did talk about personal funds a little bit. And we also have daily life and employment, which is obviously one of our assessment areas that we covered. So obviously we've done this for past gatherings, and we will continue to do so as we go throughout covering the assessment sections. Les, are you
Yeah, I'm good now. Thank you.
Calm? Did you give them a treat?
The fun of working in my dining room. So when we talk about the trending topics, we want to kind of spell out the personal funds and daily life and employment, and we want to also consider role. And we talked a little bit about the personal funds and trying to be specific of who's being responsible for what. So we want to make sure that we write down who's responsible for the personal fund, who is the payee, what is a dollar amount available for personal spending, what dollar amount can the person spend independently, what is the maximum dollar amount that the provider may spend without going to the team, do they need receipts, specific supports that the person needs, going shopping, and does the person have a guardian of the estate? Those are all important things that need to be included and touch base with. And again, we could have done a little better job when we look at Rose's plan, just to be a little more specific. But as I said, as you're doing, you're having those conversations, you're going to go through the plan, you're going to find things. And again, we're stressing that there's not a perfect plan. We're hitting all of that information, but we just need a little bit more specific stuff. So we want you to take that into consideration. And then we look at daily life and employment, and the plan should incorporate meaningful activities, community connection, employment services that consist with the person's employment outcome. What path of employment are they on? There's a place in the OhioISP to include all these requirements.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that, we had some members, obviously there are a lot of people who are involved in the creation of the OhioISP, and a lot of people put in a lot of time and effort to that work group did an outstanding job and met over the course of a couple of years, and still continue to meet to this day to kind of address different things. But as that team was kind of building the assessment and the plan and sort of how this would look, it was crafted in a way, and there were a lot of different people that looked over it from different entities, including internally in DODD, to just kind of make sure everything was covered. And I know some people occasionally get frustrated with the length of it and all of that. And I assure you that over time, we hope that this becomes a more efficient process for people as they become familiar and as they get those initial assessments into the system, that it won't be as tedious moving forward. But as Leslie said, I think it's important to know that there is a place, because everyone does worry about compliance. And I think as providers, as county boards, as ICFs, people want to make sure they're within compliance. And so I think it is important to remember that there is a place for these things. We just kind of have to be cognizant of them as we're going through. Some of those things that Les mentioned are specifically addressed as questions in the assessment. And then as we get to those areas of summary, we want to make sure we're carrying over those important things into the summary and allowing those to kind of build into the ISP portion.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. So we're looking at now the discovery assessment summary and the important twos and important fours. And we're walking over the assessment and we're walking over the bridge to the plan. I need that visual, Jim. So
I know. I wish we had like some sort of like animation showing like someone walking across the bridge. Although I don't know if it would show. Like last time I had my laser pointer, and we talked about this, like we recorded it, and then I'm talking about using the laser pointer, and I'm using it on the PowerPoint, and apparently it doesn't show up on the recording. So
right. Oh well.
Yeah. All right. Go ahead.
So this is, again, everything that we've learned in the assessment is right here in the discovery assessment summary with the important twos and the important fours. In the IT system, it's going to automatically populate. Fortunately, in the paper version, it's old school and you have to copy and paste.
Your husband would like that. Old school.
Yeah, old school, yes. And then we're looking at the skills and abilities. Again, this is all information we've already collected, and it is, from the summary, and it's placed here. So there, again, there's nothing new. We're continuing to just summarize it. With this, you're going to say, note the additional technology as part of the supervision. With the current climate and it's more important than ever to look at how technology can assist those served to reduce the reliance on paid supports. And this includes remote supports, but it doesn't even end there. There's so much stuff that is available, and you also want to think about, with technology, we're just not replacing staff. Those staff can be could serve different purposes when it comes to technology. They could, be looking at testing the system. They could be looking at documentation. They can be answering a call if the person has, a question or a concern. They can use FaceTime. So I really want to take the time, to make sure that, we are in a system right now that things are changing, and we need to take a look at technology and how that can support the individual if that's what they want. And we talk about Rose's plan about the, Ring doorbell again. There might be other things that we want to take a look at when it comes to technology and how it's assist, and just research it a little bit.
Yeah, and those are all really good points, Les. This is obviously, as we get into supervision, we're in that known and likely risk section. And so I know the PowerPoint, this slide just shows sort of the first part of it. Then the second slide we're going to show you is sort of the rest of that section. So, just kind of wanted to call out, like, obviously we've added, as you see the highlighted portion here, we've added technology to what was already in existence, because that can be used in conjunction with some of those other levels of supervision to kind of assist a person with supervision types of things. So this is the rest of the known and likely risk section as we kind of move into the next slide here.
And so with the known and likely risks, that will carry over to that first column. We're going to look at develop supports and supervision based on the risks. We're going to clearly describe what is needed to keep the person safe and healthy. We want to look at supervision that should be addressed in services and supports as well. We talk about the depth of the supervision during the November gathering, so please reference the video if you want further detail on that. We also want to look at some supports in multiple areas. For example, the transport restraint for Rose is found both in daily life and employment and in community living sections. But wherever it fits, that's where you're going to reference it at. But I just want to kind of stress that it might not just live in one area. You might find other assessment areas that you're going to say, hey, it could fit here too. So put it there. Later on, you might talk and say, well, that doesn't really live there. We might want to take a look at some other section, but it's okay if you have it in another section.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot in the past, right? We as human beings, we all are very complex, and there's not, even though this assessment is broken down into 7 different distinct sections, there's always going to be some overlap because it's really hard just to kind of put things into a box and say it lives in this area only. Most things are going to kind of cross over into different areas. So, I think with supervision, this is a little bit challenging for people because it may be different than what you're used to. Les mentioned that we talked about this a lot during the November gathering, and that video is posted, so please make sure you check that out. But supervision, we're basing that on risk. And so, when you look at those risks that are identified in that first column, we are basing supervision on those risks, and we're kind of clearly spelling out, well, what the support's going to look like. And you really just need to describe what it looks like. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. All right. So again, this is the outcomes and experiences part, and this is still part of the ISP. So this is where, Les talked about crossing over the bridge, and we crossed from the assessment into planning. And we're only really showing you this because it relates to those topics that we covered today. So if you look back at the summaries that we covered here, this is all just daily life and employment and community living. Same thing with this here, with the outcome that we referenced. This is a direct result of a specific section that we covered today. So we're looking at daily life and employment. This would be a potential outcome for Rose in that area, and that's to get a job at a local food pantry because she wants to work. So we're gonna look at getting her a job. We're not going to get into this in too much detail because Rose's sample plan is now available on the OhioISP website, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So you can kind of go through and review it at your leisure. We also have talked about the fact that so I'm kind of losing track here. Les, help me out. What was I going to say? You're muted, so thanks for helping me out with that.
Sorry, Jim.
It's okay. I had an A, so the A was that the plan's going to be available on the website. Oh, B. My B is that we are going to talk more about the ISP portion or the planning portion of things at future gatherings. That's going to be to come in I believe in March is when we're going to start getting into planning. So there'll be more to come on this particular area, and we'll talk more about outcomes and planning and all of that good stuff. There is a resource related to outcomes and experiences, which for those who haven't heard, experiences is sort of the new terminology for what some may have previously referred to as action steps. So those are the steps that that we would take to ensure that that outcome is achieved. So you can kind of take a look at the outcome here and some of those steps that would take place. I will mention, you know, we talked earlier in the assessment about Rose's desire to work at the food pantry, and obviously that's built here as an outcome. I think as we look at some of those services that would be authorized, you know, we would consider that when we're doing that. So there's the other part of the outcome section, but that's going to get into services and support. So what services and supports are needed to kind of help get there? Currently, as it exists, and I think you know, getting Rose to work at a food pantry was kind of a late addition. Right now, you know, Rose was only authorized for ADS as part of this plan, right? So adult day support, which is more activity based, and I think as you know, as we saw with Rose's desire to work, we would want to sort of align those services with her desire to work, and we would get into more of the vocational habilitation or career discovery, and then hopefully eventually we would get her to the point where, you know, with a job coach, she would have like individual employment supports while she's working in the community to assist her. So kind of building upon those wants and needs, and kind of progressing through as we identify supports and services. But this is still part of the ISP. And one other thing I wanted to call out here is that, you know, whether you're going through the paper version, and then even specifically for the IT version, each provider name is going to be listed separately. So you have at the top where it says provider name, ABC Homes, the HBC provider, is going to be listed as one provider, and all of those services will be underneath that. And then the ADS provider would be listed separately. And that's going to allow that provider to print out, generate service documentation, so that whatever you put in here as services that are required by that particular provider are going to generate onto a doc sheet so that they can record when those services occur, and you know, make sure that that frequency is in line with what is identified here in the plan. So you can see the services and supports that are listed here, and they kind of continue on into the next page. Just one other thing I wanted to reference, and Leslie kind of talked about this in the known and likely risks, that supervision is referenced here as part of services and supports. So as you're kind of going through and you're identifying supervision levels, you're going to see that kind of carried over so that the providers are able to identify that that supervision level is being followed accordingly. Okay. Les, anything else on that section?
No, I think you covered it all. I think we had a great discussion, and you know, when we take a look at stuff, again, you know, there's not one prescribed way to fill this out and one prescribed way to do it. And I have seen some plans that look a little bit different, but they still get the same information across with that.
Yeah, and I guess one of the concerns, and I don't know if you've heard this as well, but one of the concerns I've heard from the field pretty consistently has been, well, I don't know where that goes. Like, I don't know where to put that, because I have this great information, and maybe I have an existing template that, these plans are on, and I'm trying to maybe crosswalk it to the Ohio ISP, and I just don't know where this part belongs. And I hear a lot of concern and anxiety about that. And I think the most important thing to remember is that if it's important, make sure it gets into the plan, right? Make sure it gets in there. That important information should be in there. And obviously we want to answer the questions to the best of our abilities. We want to make sure, that communication section shouldn't necessarily be talking about healthy living and vice versa. But as much as you possibly can, getting that information into the plan is going to allow the providers to implement it, and that's really what's most important. I think as we kind of build and work through the Ohio ISP and maybe some of those initial struggles that we have with becoming familiar with it, I think we'll get past that and we'll get more comfortable, and we'll start to know where things maybe where they belong a little bit better. But for now, I think it's just important that as we start to use the system and we get comfortable with everything involved, that we just get it into the plan. Because if it's important to the person, we really just want to help the person live their best life, right?
Right, absolutely. So if you pull up the next slide, which says, what can we do right now? We can build awareness and consider simplification and dig deeper into the assessment questions and why we're answering some of the questions, how, digging deeper, asking the individual some things. And sometimes just having that conversation will spark something else. And they might say, hey, I forgot about this. You said that, and now, that makes me think. Evaluate current process and systems to onboard and implement the Ohio ISP. Continue to familiarize yourself with the paper version of the Ohio ISP. And, I do want to recognize, I think Jim said it at the beginning, but I'm going to say it again. If you go to the Ohio ISP website, you will find a brand new paper version that was completed in December. When I say brand new, that was probably a bad terminology. It's the same Ohio ISP with added information considering technology and some things like that. So if you haven't taken a look at it, take a look at it. But I also want to let you know that it has the same questions. So if you've done it in the past on a different form, it's okay. You might just want to add those technology pieces to what you have done, because I know that some counties are SSAs and QIDPs are doing the paper version until they onboard.
Yeah.
And then, when we're looking at what is available, and I talked about the web page, and you can find those resources at dodd.ohio.gov/OhioISP. And one of the things that every time we have a gathering, we ask SSAs, the QIDP, what do you need? What would you like, to see? What will help you? And, outstandingly, we've always heard, I'd like to see what the Ohio ISP demo looks like. I would like to see some sample plans to help me, guide me where, how the flow goes. And I think that's the biggest question. How does this flow? Because let's face it, the manual process is going to take a little bit longer than the IT platform. And then we want to look at the resources, and on a weekly basis, we meet as a team. We talk about what kind of resources could be provided. from conversations we had with SSAs and QIDPs, and we tried to develop them. So there's a lot of great new resources on there. So if you haven't been on the webpage, they were added at the end of December. So take a look at that. The facts are, we continue to update that as we get fact or questions that come in from the OhioISP email. So if you haven't looked at that, you want to make sure that you follow through. And I do want to kind of go back to the sample plans. We're putting a variety of different sample plans for people who might be on level 1, people that get local funds. We have something on there of restrictive programming. And these are exactly what we say. They're sample plans, they're example plans. Nobody should have one that mirrors this. That's not what we expect, because if that was the case, then it would not be person-centered. And it's all about the person, and we want it to be fulfilling the needs and the wants of the person. And again, I've said this before with roses. There are things that can be changed. There are things that could be added. There are things that maybe need to be taken out. So it's just a creation, and you're going to continue to be able to move forward with the individual, and you're going to explore, and you're going to have those rich conversations. And as you get that, you're going to add those to the individual's plan. So I also just want to kind of add and just let you know that for some of you that haven't attended the gatherings, you're still going to find the 6 essential elements on as a resource. You will find an outcomes documentation or outcome document to help you with some outcomes from a response information, plan language guide, OSAS's map. If you want to reach out to one of us to help out with any questions, we're always glad to hear from somebody. And sometimes the questions that come in are a little stumper, and we have to go back to the team, but we do appreciate that, and we do appreciate some of the calls and emails that we get. And just, basically looking at the assessment and planning guidance. These are some of the new things. Communication and facilitation tips. Were benefits of the OhioISP Online. Frequently asked questions. Those are all new, and we want to give a reminder that OhioISP questions and concerns and feedback are to continue to come through the OhioISP email. And again, like Jim said at the beginning, we monitor it daily, and we try to get back in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, I think Les hit upon some of those new resources that are available. So we just want to keep pointing people back to the website. Check out what we have there. There's a lot of great guidance, and if there's something else that the field needs, please feel free to let us know. I know specifically with that communication facilitation, the tips that were provided there, those came directly from the gatherings that we had when we talked about facilitating communication with people that are being served or team members. We pulled those from the gatherings that we had with you all and in the past, and put them into a document. So that's sort of a direct product of your work and your expertise in the field. And then, just one other point about the sample plans. Les kind of talked about how the fact that there's no perfect plan, and we have a disclaimer up there kind of talking about that we want everything to be done person-centered, that it shouldn't mirror specifically what you see on those samples. But shout out to all those people who helped produce those. I know we had some internal team members that were part of that, but we also had some counties and some ICFs that really helped us with some of that material. And we do have some others in the works. I know we had talked about getting all of them out at once, and we did get a group of samples, but there is more to come. I know specifically we are still working on an ICF plan, and there's some other different areas that we want to make sure we cover with the samples. So please make sure you're checking back frequently on that.
Thanks, Jim. So we're wrapping up and closing at this point, and we just basically wanted to kind of talk about the office hours and the dates and times. So with Region 1 and 2, it's January 24th, 2022 from 2 to 3. Region 3 and 4 is January 26th at 10 to 11. Region 5 and 6 is January 18th from 11 to noon. Team links and information on website under the training section of the website. So if you go there and go to the training section, you'll find that information. February's gatherings, will be on the lookout for February gathering information coming this month. We will be a similar format, just like this session. It's going to be recorded, and we're going to have office hours after that. So plan to review the healthy living section along with some additional trending topics in February.
And I think in addition to those teams links and information being available on the website, I do feel like there will be communication going out to the field about that as well, about the upcoming office hours. So just kind of be attentive to any communications through Memo Mondays or any standalone communications from our department. And I think the only other thing that I wanted to mention about this is, you know, we had a lot of really great conversations, and I know Leslie and I talked earlier, like we really missed the in-person, the interaction of that. I thought that was a great place to kind of connect and to kind of do some of that experiential work with the assessment. The fact that we had people kind of doing the assessment on each other was a really nice dynamic that was part of that. I continue to encourage you all to, you know, do those assessment sections with either on yourself, with others, becoming familiar with those questions. I think the fact that when we had those in-person sessions, Leslie, I feel like when people were answering questions, you could kind of feel how the other side is, and so I think that was a really nice touch with those, that, you know, you kind of not only get used to asking the questions, but what it's like to sort of be on the other end and answering some of those questions, which, you know, can be kind of you know, personal or difficult to answer at times.
Right, absolutely.
So, you know, continue to do those things and practice, become familiar, and as Leslie said, we will have those office hours and that information coming out shortly, and then February gatherings will be coming soon as well.
So we just both want to thank you for participating in the OhioISP gathering, and we really appreciate all the hard work that you're doing and the feedback, both good and bad. It really helps us be able to understand how to support you. And again, you know, I do want to give a shout out for all the SSAs, counties, and QIDPs that gave us some sample plans and continue to give us sample plans to help their fellow colleagues in the field. I know that's scary, and I totally understand, but I commend them for the work that they're doing. So thank you very much, and we will see you next month.
Yeah, thank you for all the work that you do. I mean, as we continue to navigate through these times, can't thank you enough for all the work that you do, and appreciate you all. So thank you.